Hey folks, Robert Quigley here, Washington, D.C., the Daily Wrap. We're on the road to the White House.
And I am Tyler Orsburn, media guru. So, Robert, recently President Vladimir Zelenskyy came to Washington and he thanked the American people, and specifically Joe Biden, about all the help we've been giving him to fight Russia. So, while he was here, he said, thanks for the money, thanks for the war weapons. And apparently, Congress, lawmakers have agreed to give them, or the Ukraine, an additional $45 billion to fight Russia. So what do you think about this? What do you think about the idea of the United States being responsible to defend democracy around the world?
Well, the overall move to support and defend the Ukraine by providing them the weapons, support, intelligence, we 100% agree with that. Russia has, as we all know, embarked upon a nation rebuilding process where their leaders, for whatever crazy reason, have dreamed about reconstituting something similar to the USSR. I think they're just dreaming of bygone days because we see what has happened to Russia. Russia's military is pathetic. They are nowhere near the monster that the world thought they were just a year ago, going back decades. And this is a classic example of somebody putting up a bullying image, and even once upon a time possessing huge numbers of military weapons, but in reality, from a military execution point of view, Russia is totally incompetent. And, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I guess you could say it's like a bully, but this bully in particular is killing people, slaughtering people, and war crime type of situations.
Oh yeah, there's no question about it. You're 100% right about that. And as a matter of fact, one lowers their head in absolute disgust when we hear the behavior of the Russians coming out of Ukraine. I mean, we all have heard about the buildings turned into torture chambers, the basements turned into torture chambers. The Russians have no problem torturing children. Elementary school age children, teenage children. They have no problem taking the senior folks in the Ukraine and torturing and killing them, or the women for that matter. I mean, they've rounded up women left, right, and center, and and they've set up rape camps, and they've sent folks, civilians, to Russian prisons, and the whole behavior of Russia in regard to the Ukrainian war tells us that some folks on the planet still live in barbarian times, and this is where Russia is. They've obviously never left that era.
So, I mean, my question is pretty much a softball question. What's our responsibility to defend democracy around the world? I mean, we have, a history of that, right? I mean, that's what we take pride in. So, but there are Congress people on Capitol Hill that don't think that this is the case or should be the case, with regards to the America First, MAGA philosophies. But, I mean, they're concerned about money. Money, money, money. Keep the money here, keep the money there, whatever. So describe to me how this money is really affecting U.S. citizens. Is it money being drawn away from U.S. citizens? What's the deal?
Well, that's part of what you've just described is the usual politics on Capitol Hill. So the first question is, are we taking money out of the mouths and hands and pockets of Americans and then transferring that money to the Ukraine? That's not exactly what's going on. So the first part of the question is we must understand the money supply in the United States. Many people still believe that they are taxed, and then the money that's collected from the population is then turned around and spent on government programs. That's a very popular myth, and it stems from common sense, and it's been around forever. The reality of the situation is the federal government is, through the Federal Reserve System, is manufacturing money. We make money at the snap of a finger, and this is what happens when Congress passes a budget. Now, this money is then deposited in various governmental accounts, private account holders' accounts, and like defense contractors, for example. So if you're manufacturing airplanes and missiles and bullets and the stuff that is being sent to the Ukraine, then essentially the federal government is taking this newly created money and they are transferring it to your account as a defense contractor. The defense contractor then uses that money to build these military weapons, to pay the people that work in their businesses, and then the military weapons themselves get sent off to the Ukraine. Now you might think for a moment, well, if that's the case, why are we still being taxed? Well, it's almost comical because truth of the matter is 50% of Americans do not pay tax at the federal level. Of course, they'll pay sales tax and the various consumption taxes. They'll pay a property tax either through their rent or through their mortgage. But in terms of federal income tax, 50% of Americans do not actually pay federal income tax. But the money that is collected is pretty much used to pay down the debt. So when America borrows money by issuing bonds, we're promising to pay that back with interest. So the money that's collected from the population is used to pay down that debt. Now, one other point on the money supply issue is the money supply it ebbs and flows because we have to control inflation. So if we put too much money into the hands of Americans and American companies and we splash it around society like we did during the virus years, the result is prices go up. And then very quickly, lots of folks cannot afford to live because the prices went too high. So that's the money supply issue. That's the why and how it operates the way it does. Now, of course, we are creating jobs by making the military weapons. We are continuing to revolutionize and advance our own defense posture and the American defense contracting industry. Now, in terms of should we be supporting the Ukraine, the issue is if we do not support the Ukraine, then Russia moves on to other East European countries. NATO is threatened, and Putin has got imperialism and conquer on his brain. So if we don't stop it from the very beginning, then of course Europe just falls to a previous time when Russia was trying to take over essentially all of Europe. We're right back into the early to mid 20th century, and of course Europe becomes part of the Iron Curtain, becomes part of Russia. So it was absolutely right to step in and defend the Ukrainians, or at least give them the tools so they could defend themselves. So that's quite a mouthful for those points that you raised, but that's what's going on.
So, how does this change in 2024? What will be the Quigley administration's policies towards Russia and the Ukraine? If nothing has changed, let's think this could be a forever war. How are you going to approach it?
Well, you raise an issue of a forever war. Yesterday we did a radio show on the history radio show, and we looked at wars and climate change in the 1600s, and we compared and contrasted that to what's going on today. And the reason why I mention it is, a lot of folks have totally forgotten their world history from back in the days of high school and college. But in the 1600s, it was essentially a century of warfare. It was a century of climate change, but it was climate change in the other direction, because they suffered what was known as the Little Ice Age of the time. But in terms of this question, they suffered a century of wars. There were dozens upon dozens of major wars that occurred all throughout the 1600s. So when we get to 2024, we have to realize that global warming is causing a tremendous amount of impacts around the planet. And essentially, we can boil it down to global warming causes food shortages. We know that resource shortages are occurring all around us, all around the planet. We know that oil is being manipulated. We know that we have to get off of fossil fuels. So when we get to 2024, the simple answer to your question is we still must support democratic countries. We still must put a check on Russian and Chinese expansion. We must put a check on North Korean belligerence in the Korean Peninsula. So we have to continue the policies that are in place, but we, of course, simultaneously, we have to implement programs that will alleviate the global warming problems. So we need to re-terraform the planet. We need to build CO2 scrubbers. We need to build desalination plants. We have to implement programs that take the reasons for war away. So on the one hand, we have to continue defending democracies in Europe and Asia and of course in America, but we also have to eliminate the problem that's causing all of the hunger and friction and heartache around the planet.
So, just to reflect on what you said, so the wars from the 1600s, you said there were many, many of them. Are you trying to normalize war because of that? And I think we can agree there were no nuclear weapons in the 1600s, so I think that's a variable to think about. And also, are you saying Russia invaded the Ukraine because of global climate change?
So you got several questions in there, and you'll have to help me make sure I cover all of them. I think that there were a couple of reasons why the Russians decided to invade the Ukraine. One of them was to manipulate the oil price, because the vast majority of Russia's money came from the sale of oil, and because of a European dependence on Russian oil. Oh, by the way, they are the third largest oil producer on the planet. So the Russians were trying to push up the oil price for personal selfish gain, and they had no idea. They thought that the Europeans were going to bow down and essentially follow the Russian will. It was foolish thinking, but nevertheless, that was a big motivator for Russia causing the invasion of the Ukraine, because there's no other rationale that makes sense at all. Now, in terms of normalizing war, the Quigley administration would never want to normalize war. The reason why we bring up the history of the 1600s is climate change causes a normalization of war. We must understand history, because history will repeat itself. And in this particular case, we see that in the 1600s, it was the Little Ice Age and the decimation of the food supply that caused a century-long period of war. And there were dozens upon dozens of wars. And one war alone caused 8 million people to die. And of course, there were no nuclear weapons, but people can find all sorts of ways to kill one another. So today we come to 2022 and we get to 2024. Global climatic issues are only going to be worse. We've learned in the last 2 weeks that the rate of ice melt in Greenland and the North Pole and the South Pole is 100 times faster than what scientists generally believe just 2 weeks ago. So what does that mean? That means that by the time we get to 2050, there will be no more frozen ice on the planet. The planet will have warmed up by then. Now, of course, looking at the snowstorm from the Arctic that we see decimating the Christmas holidays as we make this radio show, we wouldn't think that that's actually going to happen. But this is just a freak moment due to changing weather patterns. So what's going to happen is we're moving into a time period where food supplies are going to be decimated. Resources of all kinds, minerals of all kinds are going to be, we're running out of them. And the sea levels are going to rise. So everything we're talking about is going to cause more wars. We know this is a fact from history, whether we like it or we don't like it. Now, America has responded in a lot of different ways. We have stationed nearly 500 more F-35s in Japan and South Korea, for example. We have deployed more assets into the Western Pacific. We have deployed more assets into Europe, more assets in the Indian Ocean. We fully understand, and when we see the Chinese build up their military on the Indian border, and when they build up their military around the Russian border, and when they build up their military in the Pacific around Taiwan, around the Japanese area, and around Southeast Asia, we understand that we're dealing with the pressurized situation. And those folks, which represent half the global population, they're facing hunger. And anytime a nation faces hunger, there is going to be war. It will happen as sure as the sun will come up today and it will set tonight. So in terms of normalization, the American administration has to be prepared for what is coming. And the American administration, the Americans generally, the American government generally, is preparing for what we see coming. Now, your issue of nuclear war is a big deal. Obviously, there were no nuclear weapons in the 1600s, but the little ice age was, in fact, a nuclear weapon. The devastation that little ice age caused is on the scale of a nuclear war in today's terms. Of course, the Quigley administration, America never wants to have to use nuclear weapons, but we must understand that other countries have nuclear weapons. Other countries are going to be starving, and that is always a possibility. And folks don't like to think about surviving a nuclear war, instituting a nuclear war, defending a nuclear war, but nevertheless, it is an issue that's always on the table. We have to look at that from the point of view of assured mass destruction. In other words, countries that have nuclear capabilities are going to be very, very reluctant to use them because they know the consequences are very high. But just like in Russia right now, even though they have a huge nuclear stockpile and they try to saber rattle with their nuclear arsenal, the reality is they know that if they go down that road, it's a road that takes Russia to absolute and utter ruin. So in other words, the Western world and its allies cannot be paralyzed simply because the nuclear question is now one of the cards on this table that's part of the game of play. We just have to play the game with a little more cleverness. We've got to be very careful in how we deal with the possibility and use of nuclear weapons. We must realize that it's always on the table and do everything we can to avoid their use. But by the same token, when people are hungry, there's going to be conflict. We have too many people on the planet, and things, we're headed in the choppy waters. I'll finish up at this point, and I'll say the easiest way to envision this is we are on a ship in the ocean, and we know that most of the time the ocean is smooth and calm, but that's not where we are right now. We are in typhoon or hurricane territory, and the oceans are going to be very, very rough for many years to come. And that's just the reality of where we are in history and time.
Well, that leads me to ask about immigration and immigration policy. what is your stance, or what will be your stance on war refugees, hunger refugees, and where do these people go?
Well, this is a really really tough question, but we have to deal with it. And when you're an American president, it's your job to deal with the answers to this question. We, of course, must close the border. The Quigley administration will close the border between America and Mexico. There's no question about it. And people can fight lawsuits all they want, but they will discover that Quigley is going to keep that border closed, and that's just the way it's going to be. We have to face the reality that in the situation of global warming, we either protect ourselves or we are essentially going to lose everything that we think of as being American. So let me give you some examples. If we take Nouriel Roubini from New York, he's very famously known as Dr. Doom. He's a very good analyzer of economics, the world, the geopolitical environment, and he's gotten a lot of things right over his career. And he totally predicts that that the American state system is not going to survive. America, as we know it today, is not going to survive in the medium term as global warming takes off. And the reason why he makes that prediction is because of the open borders. He realizes that if everybody in Central and South America make their way into the United States, then essentially there is no more America. We're talking about the land of lawlessness. We're talking about a Mad Max environment. So we have to do everything we can to prevent that from happening. The first thing we do is we close the border, but the second thing we do is we introduce the programs that we've talked about often on this radio show. We have to correct global warming issues. We have to clean up the environment. But more important than that, we have to figure out ways to help folks in Central and South America to take care of themselves. We have to help them develop a local sustainable economy that takes away the urge to immigrate up north to America.
I'm talking about, well, because we're talking about the Ukraine, let's talk about Ukraine war refugees. When they come knocking on our door by the dozens, do we just not let them in?
Well, I think most Ukrainians who wanted to leave have left, and they are scattered around the world as we talk. Ukraine's going to go through a building phase. It's impossible for the Russians to win their conflict and win their war against the Ukrainians. At this point in time, Russia is essentially dusted off ammunition and guns and weapons that were made in the 1940s and the 1950s. Their personnel, they've conscripted soldiers which have absolutely zero desire to be part of the military. Even their so-called professional trained military, they're incompetent. And we see that the losses at this point, only God knows the official answer, but it looks like we're looking at somewhere around 300,000 Russian military personnel have been killed in their Ukrainian offensive. They ought to know by now that the West is not going to let them take the Ukraine. And in fact, the Ukrainians are at a point in the battle where they are now reaching out and attacking infrastructure inside Russia itself. So if anything, what we are likely to see is we're likely to see Russians desperately try to expand this war, which is what they're trying to do by getting Belarus involved. But they're going to be hit very hard with regardless of what road they go down. So this is important for your question about Ukrainian refugees, because what's actually going to happen is we are going to put Russia in a position where they are going to be using, or we're going to be taking, their oil dollars to rebuild the Ukrainian country and economy. And the amount of money that it's going to take to rebuild the Ukraine, and I might add to repay all of this money that the West is spending in the Ukrainian war, the Russians are going to wind up being decimated economically, financially. militarily, they're already on the road to decimation, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure that it's a total decimation. And if it takes a year, if it takes 2 years, it takes 5 years, that's what we're going to do, because obviously a country that behaves the way Russia does not deserve to be a country, which brings up the whole issue of UN reform. But on this specific issue, the Ukrainians, I'm sure, they want to go back home. I don't think the Ukrainians really like the idea of being down and out immigrants in other people's countries, and we hear from the grapevine that they would like nothing more to go back home and rebuild their country and pick up and rebuild where they've left off. So, but in a more general sense, if we talk about refugees from around the world, it's going to happen. Global warming is going to push populations away from the equator, and they're going to push them north for the most part. Some of them will go south, but there are not many places to go in the south. So there's going to be a huge push up north. And the only thing we can do is repair the atmosphere, re-terraform the planet. Because if we don't do that, then essentially the world that we're looking at right now in the northern hemisphere is not going to be the same world that we look at 10, 15 years later. So we have no choice. We're going to totally reconfigure the countries and societies we live in, and it's going to be it'll be in such a way that no one's going to be happy, or we solve these problems.
So, with regards to President Zelensky's visit, you were pleased with it, and you agree with the direction of the United States. You agree with that, like political direction.
Oh, absolutely. It's Zelensky came over. He made a pitch for bigger and stronger weapons. The Ukrainians see that they have the upper hand on the battlefield. They have suffered greatly. Personally, if I were already in the White House, I would not be hesitant one single bit in providing the Ukrainians with everything they've asked for. From the very beginning, I supported giving them helicopters, giving them airplanes. I have supported an all-out arming of the Ukrainians because I've never believed in this Russian mightiness. I've looked at this issue my entire life, from many different angles, and the Ukrainians are ready for the fight. They want to continue the fight. They want to take that fight to Moscow. They want to take that fight to Petersburg. They want to essentially make up and right the injustices that the Russians have inflicted on them. And now, from a geographical point of view, it's good to keep in mind that Moscow is 1 hour from the Ukrainian border, and that the Ukrainians can inflict some punishment on the Russians. And I got to tell you, I'm 100% for that, because everything we're talking about today, we are at a pivotal point in history, and things are going to be very harsh. And if anybody in this world thinks that we can continue to add billions of people onto this planet and do it without friction consequences, then I'm going to say that those people are still in their bed with their head under the pillow, and that's not the world that we are very quickly moving into. So, when you go through the atrocities that the Russians have committed in the Ukraine, my own personal belief is I would kick them out of the UN. I mean, first day in office, I'm going to send the cops and the military to the UN. Going to go in and put handcuffs on every one of the Russian members of that delegation, put them on an airplane and send them out and say, good luck getting back in if you can, because I control the borders. That's exactly how I would deal with it. But the Russians have demonstrated in the same ways that the Nazis demonstrated in World War II that they could care less about humanity. They could care less about the people that they encounter on the battlefield, whether they be civilians or whether they be military personnel. They have shown us a callousness and disregard for humanity that really the world thought we put to bed in 1945 with the defeat of the Nazis. And in my mind, the Russians of 2022 are no different than what we've seen in the past. So we would press the fight. We would press the fight all the way up to Moscow and beyond.
So political negotiations with regards to Ukraine and Russia are fruitless, or it will never work.
It'll never work. There's nothing to achieve with the political negotiation. Folks can talk negotiations all day long, political negotiations all day long, but we're now in a game plan a game phase where we see that victory is just down the road, and when countries, when the adversaries begin to see that loss is imminent, they usually start going to the bargaining table. But from the Ukrainian point of view, and really it is a Ukrainian decision. So I mean, I'm talking with a lot of bravado here, but ultimately, it's the Ukrainians that suffered, and ultimately it has to be their decision as to how they want the war to end. But from an American point of view and a backer of the Ukrainians, I would say that we don't stop until Putin and his cronies are hanging from the gallows, if that's how they do it over there, or they face a firing squad. And like I say, we want to make the Russians literally pay with petrodollars for every single penny and dollar of loss that they caused in the Ukraine. So I would, if we were sitting in the White House today, I would say, negotiations, there's really nothing to negotiate here. They leave, they pay for the harm they caused, they change their government, and or they they lose their right to be a country. That would be my attitude.
All right. Well, I think you've covered a lot here with regards to the Ukraine and Russia, and all we can do is pray, I guess.
That's it. I mean, we how does that saying go? We pray, we hope for the best, but we gotta prepare for the worst.
Yeah.
All right, well done. Folks, nothing is free in America. Campaigns are expensive. We must spend money to make America great for everybody. In that vein, we have a presidential raffle. We have 20 million raffle tickets to sell during the Robert Quigley for President campaign. We're giving away more than 19,000 prizes. Those prizes include, we're going to give away a house. We're going to pay off a mortgage. We're going to give away 15 Tesla automobiles. We are going to give away a half a dozen mobile homes. We're talking about Thor, the Hurricane model, top of the line, folks. In addition to that, we're going to give away home energy systems, about a dozen home energy systems, in fact. And those are going to include wind turbines, solar panels, battery packs, heating systems, all the wiring boxes and bells and whistles to make those particular homes energy self-sufficient. In addition to that, folks, in this presidential raffle, we are going to fund 4 brand new small businesses somewhere in America. And the value of those grants are going to be up to $250,000, specifically for the creation and operation of a new small business. Now, folks, in addition to those raffles, we are going to be giving away around-the-world trips. We're going to be giving away around-the-world backpacking trips, which are going to be mostly on the airlines. We're going to be giving away an around-the-world trips, that's plural, and those are going to be cruises. In addition to that, we're giving away computer systems. We're giving away Apple gift cards, Amazon gift cards, Visa gift cards. In addition to those, we're giving away Cracker Barrel gift cards, Walmart gift cards, Starbucks gift cards, and of course Papa John gift cards. Now, most of these 19,000 plus prizes have odds of about 1 in 100, which is very, very good in relation to the lottery tickets that we buy around the country. So again, we have over 19,000 prizes. Raffle tickets are $5 each. For most of the prizes, your odds of winning are 1 in 100, and we've got 20 million raffle tickets to sell. Of course, all that money supports the campaign and the campaign machine for the Robert Quigley for President campaign. In addition to the raffle, we also have a campaign hat. It's a green color. It makes you look smart, makes you look sexy, has a nice logo on the front. And again, both the cap and the raffle tickets can be bought on the campaign website, robertquigleyforpresident.com. Now, in addition to those items, folks, we also have live shows that will be occurring all across America in 2023 and 2024. We will be performing in comedy clubs, in local theaters, in academic theaters. Basically, the show is part entertainment, part educational, and part stump speech. Every show will have Q&A. Every show will be recorded as we're making both a documentary and a movie of the campaign and the life and times of Robert Quigley. So again, folks, you can go to the robertquigleyforpresident.com website. We will put the schedule up on the website as it firms up, and you can buy tickets to the shows on the website. In addition to those items, folks, we have a book that's under production as we talk. It should be up in the market in about 3 or 4 weeks. It's also going to be for sale on the campaign website. And essentially, it's a biography of Robert Quigley. You will also be able to find that on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Walmart. So, folks, if any of those items don't tickle your fancy, we also take plain, old-fashioned political donations. Again, all of these items can be found on the robertquigleyforpresident.com website. Look under the Buy and Donate button. There's more description for each of these items and each of these prizes. And with your help, together, we can make America great for everybody. And folks, before I forget, I want to offer a big thank you to our sponsors and our advertisers on iHeartRadio. We appreciate all of your support and all of your effort to help make this campaign great for everybody. We wish you a Merry Christmas, and we hope you keep up the support. All the best to you and your families. And until we meet again, thanks again. Merry Christmas.